if the DevOps engineer or the one that is in charge of putting those policies is too strict, then it might impact, the delivery and the velocity of the development tool. So I think you need to use that wisely and make sure that you maintain both velocity, but using policies to prevent something that can be very like a disaster to the company. So we just like, with great power comes great responsibility.
Welcome to the DevSec for Scale podcast, the show that makes security a first-class citizen for growing companies. My name is Jeremy Hess, Head of Developer Relations at Achilles, the secrets management SaaS platform. This interview podcast brings security experts and practitioners together to offer practical and actionable ways for small and growing companies to implement security best practices using shift-left principles without interrupting developer life cycles. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Jeremy Hess with Achilles, and today my guest is Eran Bibi. He's co-founder and chief product officer at a really fantastic startup called Firefly, and they deal with many different things, and we're going to talk about that a little bit soon. But Eran, before we get into you and the company and all of that, let's talk a little bit about PolicyasCode, which is what this episode is going to be about. So PolicyasCode, it's a bit of a newer term in the industry, and it kind of has these remnants and these ideas of sort of like old school, like policy and things like that. So can you give us a little understanding about what PolicyasCode is all about?
Yes, of course. So PolicyasCode is one of those trends of doing everything as code. And I think the main advantage of using that new methodology is having the power for developers to create policies for their own and using the community to extend the policy surface on the organization. So it's really, really cool methodology nowadays.
Got it. Well, what was it like, as in terms of like looking at policy as an old school term? What was the difference there between like what it was and how it's changed?
So the idea is basically about enforcing and prevention. So you would like to have more control about the stuff that you are deploying on your, let's say, Kubernetes cluster or cloud workloads. And PolicyasCode is basically giving you the opportunity to create those gating in the CI and make sure the configuration that you have in place is met your policy that you decide to put on your organization. It can be stuff that relate to security. This is the most common use cases, but it's also about having like alignment and best practice and even make sure stuff is built for scale.
Got it. Really cool. All right. So, Eran, why don't you give us just a little bit about you, your background, and more about what Firefly is doing today?
So, my name is Eran Bibi. I'm a DevOps engineer. In my previous role, I did a few DevOps positions in the past 10 years, and now I'm co-founding and leading the product at Firefly, a new startup that basically helping DevOps to get better control on their cloud.
Got it. All right. Well, can you give us a little bit more detail? Like what's Firefly doing in that realm of the cloud and how it's helping customers?
Sure. So Firefly is basically a cloud asset management tool, and we are scanning the cloud and then giving the user the visibility about all the stuff that he have in the cloud. And one of the main metrics that we are providing is basically what portion of the cloud is managed by infrastructure as code and what is not. And when I say not, is like workload that you are manually created using like a ClickOps kind of usage or like a CLI tooling. But in any case, you don't have any infrastructure as code. So Firefly giving you that visibility and then give you the automation to help you to increase that coverage of infrastructure as code. So think about it as the tool that help you achieving your goals of meeting best practice and industry standards.
Got it. Awesome. So getting a bit more into PolicyasCode, well, what was the impetus for these changes for policy as code, what's novel about the idea of policy as code specifically?
So we have that trend of shifting left, and with that and giving more power for developers doing stuff early in the stage of the life cycle of the software. So policy as code is basically the opposite of buying some security, a very expensive kind of security system that giving you enforcement on the runtime. So policy as code is just giving the power for the developers to use the community manifest and the community powers to put guardrails on the CI and make sure nothing is being provisioned into the production. And I think Kubernetes have a lot of with that trend. So policy as code, even if I'm talking more specifically about some framework that are popular in that domain, like OPA, is like giving you a very simple syntax to create a policies on the stuff that you can provision into the Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's actually where I wanted to take this to understand a little bit more about OPA. So, how would first of all, why don't you give us a little bit more detail about OPA? It's a large project, and let's hear a little bit more about that.
So OPA is a framework built by a company called Styra, and I think it's something like 4 or 5 years old, so it's relatively new. And it is providing a very simple syntax of creating policies. The syntax is called Rego. And by having Rego is basically checking against a JSON manifest. So if you have a workload like in Kubernetes or Terraform, for example, you can create with a few lines of code in a human readable kind of syntax a gates for stuff. So the output of the OPA is basically allow or deny. So you can create those rules and say, let me give you some very concrete example. You will not allow any workload without liveness probe to be provisioned into your Kubernetes cluster. So you basically can create a Rego syntax that working against the manifest of a deployment or Kubernetes deployment, and just make sure you have that block of liveness in your manifest. And if you don't have it, it will basically provide a deny kind of output, and then you can gate it early in the stage of deployment and make sure you don't have any deployment running without liveness probe.
Oh, got it. Okay. So, well, how would, let's say, a startup, or an early stage company be able to implement policy as code, based on the OPA, framework?
So it's very easy because of that. Policy as code is a code, and it can be shared in GitHub. You can find tons of projects online already have a built-in kind of policies that you can use, even without writing a line of code. Just cloning those repositories and implement it on your cluster. So in Kubernetes case, there is a project called Gatekeeper that is checking your policy against the running workload and making sure you don't have any violation on your runtime. And there is also some tooling that you can put even before that in your CI that is just scanning your manifest, like Helm chart or YAML manifest, and making sure you don't have anything that is misconfigured. But I think the real power of policy as code is the community. The fact that you, without writing any line of code, you have tons of policies out there, and even like a compliance packages. You can have like a PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance, best practice, well architected, all of those stuff already available for any developers to put on their CI, and making sure nothing that is misconfigured will be provisioned to the cloud.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the power of community. We always love our community members or community friends, and developers helping developers is always a fantastic melding together of minds. So it's really great. Let's ask a little more about PolicyasCode specifically in terms of the challenges, things that are a little bit more difficult. Let's say, what are kind of the challenges that you see, or what's the biggest challenge, let's say, of implementing PolicyasCode at an early stage company?
So putting gates, whether it's like denying stuff of being provisioned to the cloud, can be something that can slow you down. So if an early stage startup is all about, delivering fast value to the customers without having everything perfect, if the DevOps engineer or the one that is in charge of putting those policies is too strict, then it might impact, the delivery and the velocity of the development tool. So I think you need to use that wisely and make sure that you maintain both velocity, but using policies to prevent something that can be very like a disaster to the company. So we just like, with great power come great responsibility.
Yeah.
It's great, but you need to make sure again, in early startup, to move fast, and then you have the time to fix and align other like non-perfect kind of workloads that you have on the cloud.
Got it. Well, actually, you come from a bit of a larger company that was a startup not too long ago, Aqua. So you also have that security background. What would you say are some things that you saw that at a larger company you were able to implement, but now at a startup, it's a little bit more difficult to implement those specific ideas and tools?
So my experience with Aqua was very similar to what we have right now in Firefly, because I was joined Aqua Security very early stage when we were like 20 employees. And again, it was the same dilemma, because I was the one that is in charge on the CI/CD pipeline, and I put those tooling in order to make sure there is the right gating in place. So I think if I'm, looking specifically about security, the policy was very strict regarding, high and critical vulnerability, that the CI will basically stop the build in case there is such findings. But for lesser than that, we were very like only about like alerting and not enforcing and stopping the build, because again, startup need to make sure there is an high velocity of workloads, and developers doesn't have to deal all the time with why the CI was stopping the build. And again, it as I mentioned, is a really in terms of finding the right balance.
Absolutely. So another question I really like to ask all my guests when we're talking about especially security is, do you at Firefly, do you use your own product in order to check your own product?
Yes, of course. We are calling it like drinking our own champagne.
Yeah.
So
instead of dog food, right? Instead of dog
yes,
food.
dog food. We find a prettier term for that. So the dog food protocol in Firefly is about making sure all of our AWS account and Kubernetes cluster are integrated with Firefly, and we are using that in order to make sure the cloud is aligned with best practice and everything is codified, meaning described as code. And it's a great kind of experience. We have our own like DevOps engineer, and he's using Firefly like any other customer. And if you find a defect, he's open a defect for the development, and it's a great methodology.
All right, fantastic. Now, one more question I like to also ask is, just for our listeners, because of course we're trying to talk about shift left principles and how to make sure that developers are still able to continue doing their work with as little stopping and changing as possible, but also make sure that they're implementing security best practices. What are, let's say, one or two tips you might give, generally about how developers can implement security? What are some, in your head, in your eyes, what are some basics that a developer could implement without worrying too much about overhead?
So if like a shift left was all about putting stuff in the CI, I think right now the trend is even left than that. So every plugin that a developer can put in the IDE, whether it's a VS Code or other kind of tooling, that is giving him the visibility about the status of this code in all of those perspectives, whether it's a configuration or even a security on a specific code block that is writing. So there is a great tooling out there that integrate with the IDE. So this is stuff that I will recommend, and I think it's become very like a standard kind of approach of having those plugins in the IDE.
Great. That's a great one. Yeah, I think that developers definitely have that idea. And on top of that, I wanted to ask just a little extra here, which is not specifically related to this necessarily. I'm going to be doing a meetup with your team on the newest product open source project that was put out into the world, a valid IAC. So maybe as a little preview, we can give our listeners what's valid IAC all about.
Of course. So we basically created that SaaS offering for developers to have a very nice access directly from the browser to make sure the infrastructure as code is aligned with few verticals. So we have a security scanner, a linter, and also a cost projection. We use a few of the most popular open source tooling and just combine it into one very nice UI, SaaS-based. And of course, it's open source, so I encourage everybody to support us with a star and even contribute if you think additional tool can be added to that portal. But I will keep the demo into the meetup.
Yeah, for later, absolutely. Fantastic. All right. So that was a fantastic interview, Eran. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Good luck with Firefly, and hopefully we get to have you on again when Firefly hits, their next rounds of funding and beyond. And we wish you all the best. So have a great day, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.